Hello, I'm Poulomi Banerjee from Hindustan Times, and with me today is popular writer Ashwin Sanghi. Mr. Sanghi will be talking to us about his new book, The Keepers of the Kaalchakra, and I hope about lots more. Mr. Sanghi, tell us about the new book. Is it out yet? Has it been released?
Yeah. As you know, Poulomi, today we did a session at 12:30 at JLF, and and coinciding with that session, the book has actually come out into stores. So it's now available online and offline both. Yeah, I hope that people will enjoy reading it.
So we know that it's a thriller, Mr. Sanghi, like your other books, but if you will tell us just a little bit about the plot and the setting.
Well, for me, this has been the most difficult book to write. The reason being because I'm not a scientist. I don't have a background in physics. And what I've realized as we have moved along is that there is a huge overlap between what the sages were telling us through the Vedanta and through the Upanishads, and what quantum physicists are now telling us. So the aim was to try and find the merging, the meeting ground between these two. The Kaalchakra, the Kaalchakra translates to Kaal, which is time, and Chakra, which is wheel. So it's the wheel of time. But if you look at the symbolic representations of the Kaalchakra, what it represents is your mind, your body, your consciousness, all encapsulated within the entire universe, where you are not separate from the rest of the universe, but are merely an infinitesimal portion of the entire whole. So the aim was actually to bring across that fundamental notion of oneness, which is what I have tried to do through the Kaalchakra. Of course, it's all in a very, very fast-paced and thrilling type of read. But I've tried to bring some of these very fundamental spiritual concepts into the book.
Right. You are saying that this is part of your Bharat series, The Keepers of the Kaalchakra. So what is common to the earlier books, whether it's Chanakya's chant or any of the other books, and this? Is there any common thread or theme that joins all these?
Sure. If you look at the Bharat series, what it is really stories which are rooted in the Indian ethos. So, for example, if you looked at, let's say, the Rosabal line was my very first book, and even though it explored Abrahamic religions far more than Indic ones, but the truth is it explored the commonalities. What were the common threads? With Chanakya's chant, I was attempting to look at ancient India and ancient Indian politics and compare it with today. With the Krishna key, I was trying to explore whether Krishna could have been a real person. So that wonderful what-if scenario, that could this be true? Sialkot saga, 70 years of post-independence India. So the one common factor across all of these books is India, its culture, its mythology, its history, its religions, its varied forms of thought. And it's this one gorgeous melting pot, which pretty much defines the Bharat series.
Right. But all your books, there's a deep-seated element of history in it. There's a lot of mythology involved, as well as there's an element of the modern, whether it's modern politics, whether it's science. Yes. So I'm sure it takes a lot of research to kind of write with authority on all this and combine the two. So how do you manage that? What kind of research do you put in?
Well, typically for any of my books in the Bharat series, Poulomi, I typically spend at least a couple of years developing the book, which means, in other words, anywhere between 6 months to a year on research, at least around maybe 3 months on plotting the story. And then the easiest part of this entire process is actually writing it. Because by the time you're done with this sort of research and you're done with this sort of plotting, where every twist and turn of the story is already known to you, writing it is almost effortless. So the research, of course, depends on the nature of the book that I'm writing. So, for example, Chanakya's chant fundamentally involved a reading of the Arthashastra several times, as well as a Sanskrit play which talks about the life of Chanakya, and that is called the Mudra Rakshas. On the other hand, the Krishna Key was fundamentally once again revisiting the Mahabharata, but it also involved visiting many places like Dwarka, Mathura, Somnath, many places that I have spoken about. As they say, seeing is believing. Sialkot Saga, for example, because it spans 70 years of the country after 1947, the thought process was that a lot of the things that were going on in India you could get from history, from historical books and from accounts. But more importantly, to create the atmosphere, it required meeting with lots of people who could actually explain. So, for example, if you went to, let's say, you were in Kolkata and you were having a puchka pani at Victoria, right? Right? What would it have cost? Or, for example, if you went out for dinner in the 1960s to one of these posh dining places in Bombay, what was then Bombay, and which had these jazz quartets and all of that, then which were the most famous places? Or if you were going to see a movie with your family, what was playing at that time and what was famous? So getting that sort of input only happens through talking. And out here, of course, in the case of Keepers of the Kaalchakra, it was actually spending a lot of time with some of my IIT friends, because I didn't know the first thing. I've not been educated in quantum theory, so it was almost like sort of quantum theory 101, trying to understand the entire thing and then trying to find the correlations with spirituality.
So I would like to tell the audience that even though Mr. Sanghi is writing fiction here, he's putting in as much of real life reporting as any of us journalists do, or probably a non-fiction writer does. That's really commendable, Mr. Sanghi.
Well, actually, it's not that strange, no, Poulomi, because the truth is that if you want to make your story, even in the world of fiction, if you want to make it believable, then the closer you are to the truth, the more believable it is. So if I'm explaining a hospital scene where someone needs to be revived by giving electric shocks to the heart, then in that case I better know at what voltage those shocks are going to be administered. Or for example, if I'm writing a crime thriller, then if I'm describing a mortuary or a morgue in India, then I better know how it operates, because it's not CSI. It operates very differently. So the closer you are to the truth, the more your fiction becomes believable.
True. But do you think fiction was always so close to reality, Mr. Sanghi, or do you think it's something that's developing with time? And it's only now that we are, as in films, so in books, we are learning to be more real and believable.
Well, for the longest time, our films, of course, meant basically boy meets girl, and they run around a tree, and they overcome challenges and eventually live happily ever after. But look at the change that has happened in films also, right? Over the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen a wide variety of films coming out on, and I'm happy to see that we are now, Bollywood is also beginning to have more innovative stories and stories that are set in some form of reality. And the same applies even to books. We've always loved fiction that sounds real. Why did we like reading, let's say, James Bond? Because Ian Fleming had worked in the intelligence agencies. So to that extent, even though it may have been in the top, over the top, but it was grounded in deep research which was already known. Or for example, Frederick Forsyth. Why do we love reading Frederick Forsyth? Because every little detail of how special forces would operate, or how espionage would actually happen in the real world, that has actually been transported into the world of fiction. So as I've always maintained, I always love fiction that sounds like fact, and fact that sounds like fiction. I mean, look at the sensational news that we watch on television. It's actually fact, but with a soundtrack almost.
Right.
So, they're merging.
Right. Mr. Sanghi, there are very many people who are entering this genre of Indian literature now, which kind of combines a bit of mythology, a bit of history, some thrill, or a little bit of modern, reinterpreting our stories, so to say. Of course, you and Amish are at the forefront of that movement. But I wanted to ask you, at a time like this, when we have seen that both history and religion and our religious stories can be very sensitive, how difficult is it to work in this genre?
You have to tread a fine line. But I do believe in 2-3 things, what I consider to be golden rules. Number one, I would say whenever you're writing about something which involves the faith of someone, then it's important to approach the subject with a sense of respect. Because that respect will reflect in your words, in the language that you use. I would say the second is that you owe it to your readers to do a lot of research, so that even when you are making certain comments, you're as close to reality as possible. And third, I think even though these are stories which are fictional, they do have a bedrock of factual basis. So therefore, I at least make it always a point to provide an additional reading list at the back of my books, so that if I have said something, I can actually tell you where it has come from. And even in case there was an alternative viewpoint, very often I'll offer you those alternative viewpoints in my reading list, because I don't see my book as simply a story. I see it as a starting point for a further exploration into that subject. So that's what I try and do. And I think that has kept me in good stead.
Absolutely, absolutely. One last question, Mr. Sanghi, we'll be wrapping up. I'm sure you have a busy schedule today, but apart from your Bharat series, you have also written self-help books, your 13-step books, and you have co-authored the private series.
Yes.
So, which of these 3 kind of writings that you have done is your favorite, and why? And also, since I'm making it a last question, I'm trying to pack in as much as I can in that one question. So, how difficult is it co-authoring a book as a creative person? Does that limit you somewhat?
Well, I would say there are 2 things. One, let me answer your second question first. The co-authoring bit. Co-authoring implies that you need to impose a sense of discipline in terms of who's going to do what.
Right.
So if you're going to be working on a plot outline and your co-author is going to be revising the plot outline, then by the time you get down to the first draft, you need to stick as close as possible to the outline. You can't stray, because then that means that both of you have set out. Think of it this way, that both of you are living at 2 ends of India. Both of you have set out that we will meet somewhere in the middle, but you are walking without a map. What are the chances that you're going to meet? So the discipline of outlining and making sure that every twist, every turn in the story has been worked out, that's very important. And then, of course, having a method where one person does a first draft, another person does a second draft. So,
So how do you and Mr. Patterson do it?
It's almost like dancing together. You can't dance together unless you've coordinated your movements. And that's pretty much what happens. With James Patterson and myself, typically one person will work on the outline, the next person will write the first draft, and then it goes back to the first person for the second draft.
Okay.
So, but the starting could be anywhere. It could start with me, or it could start with him.
And do you often get lost, the two of you?
Touch wood, not so far. Not so far. The other question you asked me was that which part of it do I really enjoy the most?
Yes.
I must tell you, my passion is my Bharat series.
Right.
Because for 2 years I get lost in that subject, and I'm deeply at that point of time embedded and absorbed in that particular subject. But undoubtedly my private series with James is also very interesting. But those are a little more mechanical, because the stories are not set in history, mythology, science. So they are much more about the present day. My 13-step series started out as a single book on luck, and then of course it's morphed into a series, so many more books have come out in that. Those now gradually, I have more of co-authoring going on, where a person who has a vertical domain knowledge actually develops all the research and the backbone for the book. And then I end up helping them in terms of actually conveying a story and making sure that it is immensely readable and enjoyable. So I would say that, but yes, my first love remains my Bharat series.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanghi, for taking out time to talk to us today. I can't wait to read Keepers of the Kaalchakra, and I'm sure neither can the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Poulomi. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.